Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on what time you're watching this. My name is Connor from 905 Review. You are tuning into our series Give This a Spin, where I recommend you guys some of my favorite albums. Today with an absolute classic, King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King. For this release, we go back to 1969. Where the remains of a failed psychedelic pop group by the name of Giles, Giles and Fripp would regather and form King Crimson. Dropping the more pop elements they previously employed, they became more jazz-oriented, making use of elements such as uncommon time signatures and free improvisation. So those featured, coupled with the band's prowess on both rock and orchestral instruments, gave them this huge sound that was unlike much else that was out at the time. And with that being said, we jump into the opening track, 21st Century Schizoid Man. After a half minute of ambient analog sounds, you're hit with this absolute barrage of guitar, drums, and horns from out of nowhere. This then all fizzles out as a single, constant strumming guitar sets the pace for Greg Lake's distorted vocals before the wall of sound hits again. Every time. After two verses, we segue into this frantic instrumental portion of the song dubbed Mirrors, and it is very reminiscent of freeform jazz, only it's mixed with King Crimson's rock influence, and it comes off to great effect. The electric guitar is used for the prominent solo, as the bass, the drums, and the screeching brass all just do their thing in the background. The second portion of the song is the bass guitar and clarinet, if I had to guess, doing these repeated scales in unison before getting into a jam and then getting back to sounding like the start of the song again. As a side note, the song was also famously sampled in Kanye West's hit single Power. Now, you know your boy doesn't really listen to lyrics on his own time, so it was very interesting to learn that this song is about the band's take on America's involvement in the Vietnam War. Following this is the much calmer I Talk to the Wind, as we are soothed by the opening flute in the song. Fitting, as later we get a sweet, optimistic sounding flute solo, followed by one on guitar. Later, the song feels as if it's done, before the drums bring us back in, leading to an instrumental outro. Very peaceful song. This then slowly fades out as the drum roll intro to Epitaph fades in, which sounds very emotional and heart-wrenching right from the get-go. Everything dies down, and we're left with conversation volume words from Lake, accompanied only by a bass line and a beat. The harpsichord and guitar eventually join, as Lake starts to get louder himself, sounding more and more distraught. After the second verse, we reach a dramatic climax, which then leads to an instrumental portion known as March for No Reason. And it is very grim and funereal in sound. On top of these slow pounding drums, we receive a flute solo imitating the tone of the vocals previously sung on this song, It then gets back into the start of the epitaph, reaches its emotional peak, leading to an instrumental jam as the song eventually fades out. We can only assume this portion of the song is what's dubbed Tomorrow and Tomorrow, as the track listing says that some songs include sections but doesn't state which are which. Another song I would assume to be based on war from the sounds of it. Very grim, very sad, but fantastic nonetheless. Flipping the record over, we start the second side with the longest song on the album, Moonchild. A descending riff to open the track sets a somewhat sad and uneasy mood to it. There's some guitar wailing in the back, and honestly, I quite like the sound of the drums on this. It sounds very minimal, like there's no reverberation to it at all, which surprises me because I generally tend to enjoy the much bigger, not necessarily louder, but more encompassing drum sounds. It's a nice soothing intro, but the portion of the song dubbed The Dream caps off at 2.5 minutes. That's all there is to this song. There's a bit of relaxing mellotron after, but the next 10 minutes of this is just minimal free improv. So much they could have done with this song, yet didn't. It's really no surprise they didn't play this in nearly 50 years after the album came out. Once you finally make it through that minimalist dabble section, you're carried back into the world this album first created for you, with the blaring organs that come on in the Court of the Crimson King. The lyrics on this thing are reminiscent of medieval times, I would say. And the sounds of the music, it's quite contrary between how the intro is and how the music during the verses are, with how they go from being real loud with all the instruments playing to being very quiet afterwards. And in that sense, this song is quite comparable to the album's intro, 21st Century Schizoid Man. After a brief instrumental break, they come back into the song with even more force now. Following this is a somber flute solo, aka The Return of the Fire Witch. Then after one final verse, a 2.5 minute outro to the song, and furthermore album, The Dance of Elves, is that what it's called? The Dance of Puppets, fuck. Following this is a somber flute solo, aka The Return of the Fire Witch. Then after one more verse, there's a 2.5 instrumental outro of the song and furthermore the album, dubbed The Dance of Puppets. Of the Puppets, something like that. Fuck off. Following this is a somber flute solo, aka The Return of the Fire Witch. Then after one more verse, there's a 2.5 minute instrumental outro of the song, and furthermore of the album, known as The Dance of the Puppets. It definitely feels like it ties everything together to finish off the album. Everything's done with, we've reached a happy ending, plus it sounds very cute on top of that. Or so you thought, until the band brings us back in for one final jam to send us off with. In the Court of the Crimson King has been released many times throughout the years on all major formats. Plus, it's considered one of the most notable albums in history, so it should not be too hard to get your hands on. with the original recording of the album in 1969. A flaw with some of the equipment they were using led to the album cutting out some of the higher frequencies that were supposed to be there, as well as gaining some unwanted distortion. So to try and do their best to salvage it, they made a copy of this recording that they went along and edited, like I said, to try and fix it as best they could. And then the original flawed recording was stored away and then forgotten about and kind of went missing. Much later in time, this original recording was finally found again and put on CD, sold in Europe in 2004 and in the United States in 2005. In 2009, to commemorate the album's 40th anniversary, a few different sets were made. One was a double CD set that contained alternate mixes as well as some demos of the songs on the album. One was a CD and DVD package that contained more of the same kind of stuff. And the other was a 6-disc set, 5 CDs and 1 DVD that contained even more of the same stuff, plus some live material on top of that. In 2010, the found original recording of the album was finally put on vinyl, and a whopping 200-gram vinyl at that. And the same was done again in 2018, which just so happens to be the version that a certain music reviewer's very cool girlfriend got him. In 2015, the album was pressed on a picture disc vinyl, and then in 2019, for its 50th anniversary, we had many more editions. One of them was a Dutch release of the album that had a very cool holographic sleeve to it, and it seems like it's official. However, for whatever reason, it is banned from being sold on the Discogs marketplace. There's also a triple CD plus Blu-ray DVD box set of some brand spanking new 2019 mixes of the album, plus a bunch of the older mixes. You could also buy all the content from this digitally, however, just what's on the CDs and not what's on the DVD. There was also a Japanese release of a double record of this, one with the new 2019 mix and one with the original mix. And then there was also a release of this on a blue vinyl. This album was a smashing success upon its release in 1969 and was absolutely pivotal to the recently founded progressive rock genre. This album was so successful right off the bat that the band's first live gig was opening for the Rolling Stones. This instant success in touring took a heavy toll on the band, as multi-instrumentalist and main composer Ian MacDonald, drummer Michael Giles, and singer/bassist Greg Lake all ended up leaving the band due to differing opinions on where to take the group's music. This left only guitarist Robert Fripp, who had started to become the vocal face of the band, and Peter Sinfield, who at the time didn't even play instruments for the band, he just wrote their lyrics. To think an album like this would reach number 5 on the UK albums chart and number 28 on the US Billboard, it's almost unfathomable to me, especially when you compare it to all the albums that have reached those kind of heights in my lifetime. On top of this, In the Court of the Crimson King has been included on many all-time greatest albums lists. This album was highly influential, coming out long before classics from the same genre from the likes of groups like Yes, Rush, or Pink Floyd. Incorporating jazz elements when rock was mostly based off of blues, and then pushing that to its limits, it was absolutely brilliant of them. This album's a great listen even by today's standards. Imagine what it would have been like tossing it on 52 years ago when there was so little like it out at the time. But alas, I can't really go back in time and do that. I can't unhear all the great stuff that came out afterwards that I already have. With that being said, I'm going to rate King Crimson's debut album with a B+ grading. It certainly was a trailblazer. It featured some quality musicianship, but the general public hold it in much higher regard than I do. The track I Talk to the Wind is very peaceful, but it's almost too soft for me. While there are some things I can overlook on albums I really love, a quarter of this sounding no different than my friends and I all picking up instruments we aren't trained on and just dabbling around, I can't really stand by that. And I'm looking at you, Moonchild. Oh, there's still 5 minutes. While there are some great tracks on here, hitting 3 out of 5 isn't that great. On that note, I want to thank you so much for tuning into this episode and give this a spin. It's been a pleasure, and we hope to see you next time. But, real quick, before we go, what were your thoughts on In the Court of the Crimson King? Did I rate it too high or did I rate it too low? Were my thoughts valid, or do I just not get it? Let me know down below. Maybe also what other albums you might want to hear my thoughts on. And we'll see you next time. Have a blessed day.